right, I want to honor your time, and we have so much to learn. We have so much to cover. We are going to be taking the billionaire rocket, the Tesla and Branson rockets, and we're going to be shooting off, and we're going to be hovering way high, thousands and thousands of feet in the air as we look at this. UDL is a deep and complex theory of knowing and learning and lesson planning, but it's also very, very simple. And we will explain that and talk about that. All right, if you have not already, please click on the chat and open the document that's there. It's the agenda. This will be your resource for all sorts of ideas, information, books, everything, knowledge, and all the links on it should be working. They were this morning, and you would be able to keep this and use it for several years to come. So I would definitely keep it, star it, or whatever. And if you go through it and you find things that you really love, you would probably want to put them in your own folders and things like that in case somehow, for some reason, the links stop working. All right, welcome everybody. If you just joined us, please open a copy of the agenda. Please tell me where you teach and what you teach. And then I would like you to do something, please. I would like you to tell me, are you a novice with UDL? Are you coming along with UDL? Are you an expert in UDL? And it does not matter where you are on the spectrum. I would just like to know. Novice, approaching, or getting along, or expert. Have a novice and novice. Good. Expert. Ooh, Rebecca. Good. So if you are an expert, Rebecca, please feel free to chime in the chat and put in resources that you've used or insights that you have. Novice with a class from Katie Novak. Excellent, Heidi. We have based all of our work on the Novak system, but we've brought in a lot of other things as well. So, but some of these things may be familiar to you, and you can go, aha, yay. Burian, novice, excellent. Okay. It's always very important to start with norms and expectations. So please stay engaged and avoid multitasking if you can. This will be demonstrated to me by your contributions to the chat. And it looks like we're a kind of a smaller group, so that will give us more time to interact together with the chat. That's exciting. As I said before, I'm used to other platforms where you have a chance for breakout rooms, you can see faces, people can speak. So this is a slightly different platform and an environment. All right. Assume positive intentions from your classmates and from me. And then this is the most important one. Expect and accept non-closure. This is a session, or the contents of this session are something that I usually take 3 to 4 sessions of an hour to 2 hours each to teach and inform. So I am condensing about 6 to 8 hours of information into 90 minutes. We are going to go fast, but we're going to skim right on the top. So you will have a lot of questions. You may have a lot of confusion. I will do my best as we go along to help with those. And those of you who know this before, I hope that you'll chime in and assist me with this. But you will have my contact information, and I would appreciate it. I would welcome you contacting me with any questions you have. We can talk one-on-one. We can talk with a group of people, any way you want. If you are in a different ESD, I can help you make contact with your representative if you wish, but you can also work with me. It doesn't matter where you are in the state. If you are responding to a specific person in the chat, please use the @ symbol and use the agenda to access the resources. And I forgot to take out the last part of that sentence in the slide. So I'm so used to doing discussion rooms. I'd like to begin with OSPI's understanding and encouragement of ensuring educational equity, what that means to OSPI. Ensuring educational equity goes beyond equality. It requires education leaders to examine the ways current policies and practices result in disparate outcomes for our students of color, students living in poverty, students receiving special education and English language learner services, students who identify as LGBTQ+, and highly mobile student populations. Ensuring educational equity requires education leaders, that's us, to develop an understanding of historical contexts, engage students, families, and community representatives as partners in decision-making, and actively dismantle systemic barriers, replacing them with policies and practices that ensure all students have access to the instruction and support they need to succeed in our schools. This is a land acknowledgement by OSPI. Today, those of us representing OSPI respectfully acknowledge that the agency is located on the traditional lands of the Squaxin Island Nation, descendants of maritime people who lived and prospered along the shores of the southernmost inlets of the Salish Sea. We ask each of you to show gratitude to the tribal nations where you are currently located. We acknowledge the commitment of all Pacific Northwest tribes to the resurgence of their traditional ways and their respect and protection of all people, not only those who are living, but also those who have gone before and those who are yet to be born. We pay our respects to the elders, both past and present, and to a valued resource the tribes have defined as their children. They are the tribe's future. They are the future for us all, and we raise our hands to all sovereign tribes who have stewarded these beautiful lands throughout the generation. Our logistics for today will run about 85 minutes. There is an agenda. The link is in the chat. You can either scroll up and get it, or maybe somebody who's got it can put it in the chat for us again. Please make a copy. Open it in another tab and just leave it open. Please note that all the slides are covered by the Creative Commons copyright and have been built on the work of many people, scholars, practitioners, and champions. You will notice in several of the slides there is a little icon, and these are the three principles of UDL: action and expression, engagement, and representation. We'll talk about them in more depth in a few minutes. But when you see that icon, it represents a UDL strategy being implemented or used. This whole presentation, the design, this whole PD has been designed using as many UDL strategies as possible. We are very limited by our platform that we're using, but we're doing our best, and that's all we can ever do. Is that right? I think you agree. Thank you, Rebecca, for putting that in for me. I really appreciate it. Our learning goals. Good teaching always starts with a goal. By the end of the professional development, SWEBAT, what does SWEBAT mean? Students will be able to. It's very important that your students know and can see and refer back to the goals of the lesson. In this time, you will be able to gain a basic, and I emphasize basic, overview of the process of developing a lesson plan based on UDL that addresses all learner variabilities, removes barriers for all students, utilizes multiple means of engagement, representation, and action expression, sometimes called assessment, and allows for student voice. Please note that a very important UDL strategy is to always begin with clearly articulated goals. It helps students become engaged. They understand what they're doing. When I was a kid, or when somebody ever explained something new to me, I always want to know what's the object. So for instance, golf. My husband is a rabid golfer, not avid, rabid. We live on a golf course. And so you can tell me all about golf and all this stuff and the swing and all stuff, but if I don't understand that the goal is to hit the little tiny ball 300 yards down the course into the really little hole in the fewest number of strokes, everything you tell me will make no sense. However, once you tell me the object of the goal or the goal, then I will understand and be able to link all information, new information, to that goal and to that understanding. It will really help me to be engaged, to process, to understand, and then finally to be able to do. So, what is universal design for learning? UDL, universal design, is the design of buildings, products, or environments to make them accessible to all people, regardless of age, disability, or other factors. The term universal design was coined by the architect Ronald Mace to describe the concept of designing all products and the built environment to be aesthetic and usable to the greatest extent possible by everyone, regardless of their age, ability, or status in life. However, it was the work of Selwyn Goldsmith, author of Designing for the Disabled in 1963, a very good year I might add, who really pioneered the concept of free access for people with disabilities. His most significant achievement was the creation of the dropped curb, now a standard feature in the built environment. Universal design emerged from a slightly earlier barrier-free concepts, the broader accessibility movement, and the adaptive and assistive technology, and also seeks to blend aesthetics into these core considerations. Curb cuts or sidewalk ramps, essential for people in wheelchair, but are also used by all. That's a very common example. Color contrast in dishware with steep sides that assist those with visual or dexterity problems are another. There are also cabinets with pull-out shelves, kitchen counters at several heights to accommodate different tasks and postures. And amidst many of the world's public transit systems, low-floor buses that kneel or bring the front down to ground level to eliminate the gap, or are equipped with ramps rather than onboard lifts. What UDL is and isn't. Universal Design for Learning is an educational framework based on cognitive neuroscience. Let me say that one more time. It's an educational framework based on cognitive neuroscience. It is not a curriculum. It is not a program. It is not a set of books. It's a way of making decisions based on the needs of all your students, teaching to the edges, those who may have the most barriers, and maybe those who are highly capable. We call that teaching to the edges. We don't design for the average student because there is no such thing. That's a myth. We design for the edges. And then we are able to reach all the students. You may have noticed that the term UDL is being used by educators a lot lately. Why is this, you ask? One of the main reasons is that UDL is gaining national and state momentum due to the inclusion of it in our laws and regulatory guidance from departments of education. For example, UDL was written directly into the new Federal Education Act entitled Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, which Congress passed and was signed by President Obama in December of 2015. For the first time, the nation's general K-12 education law defines and endorses universal design for learning. What you may not know is that UDL is well represented in countries such as Belgium, Singapore, New Zealand, England, India, Spain, Chile, Portugal, Malta, and Canada. UDL helps educators address the widest range of learner variability, reduce barriers, and improve access for all students to a full and rich inclusive education. I want to take a few minutes to clear up some of the misconceptions about UDL that I've heard. One misconception is that UDL is only to support students who are struggling academically or receive special education services. While a lot of UDL literature is focused on students with disabilities, UDL is a Tier 1 approach. Let me say that again. UDL is a Tier 1 approach, meaning it is used with all students. It is intended to meet the needs of all learners, those at, above, or below grade level. UDL is not a set of specific textbooks, resources, or curriculum. It is not one particular delivery method of instruction. Full implementation of UDL takes several years, usually 4 to 7, and should be accomplished in small increments. And we'll discuss that in a little bit. UDL by design is as unique and variable as the learners in the classroom. As I said before, it is an instructional design process. The purpose is to teach to the edges. Another misconception is that UDL is all fun and reduces rigor in our classrooms. When done correctly, UDL maintains rigor while addressing all students' needs by reducing barriers. One misconception I hear is that because choice is a large part of UDL, the students are not challenged to do specific tasks such as writing an essay. This is not the case. For example, math students are required to solve an equation or a graph line. In English, students are required to write informational texts from a firm thesis and clear introduction, body, and conclusion. How they do that, how they demonstrate it, is the part that is variable. Students are still expected to do this in a universally designed class. A last misconception that I'll address is the concern that UDL will not challenge a student who lacks motivation, as they will choose the easy way out. The choices provided are intended to have similar levels of rigor. In addition, students are encouraged to have a growth mindset and are encouraged to engage in choices that may go outside of their comfort zone. Mastery-oriented feedback is provided by the staff, who will work with students to ensure they challenge themselves. In fact, a student who lacks motivation is often not engaged. And engagement is one of the three main principles of UDL. As a matter of fact, it is the first one. If students are not engaged, if they do not understand why they should do something, they don't care and they won't. This topic also relates to executive functions. The UDL framework typically involves efforts to expand an executive capacity in two ways. One, by scaffolding lower level skills so that they require less executive processing, and by scaffolding higher level executive skills and strategies so they are more effective and developed. Actually, a perfect example of this is behind me on the, oh, I forgot to introduce myself. I'll do that in a minute. Behind me on the quilt. I was a good student in high school, and math was fine. I was great in algebra, loved algebra. Geometry, I was terrible. And the reason for it is the way I was taught geometry was by writing proofs, lines and lines of proof, proof after proof after proof. And I was frustrated. What do I do with this? Why am I doing this? How about if I just agree that Euclid was right about 3,000 years ago? Why do I have to write a proof? If a teacher had told me, well, Elise, it's really great to learn how to write proofs because it teaches you to think logically. It develops your skills to be able to think and write down and move from point to point to point in an orderly way. Well, I still would have thought it was boring, but it would have been okay. Okay, I get it. This is something I need for later. Yep, I'll do it. Now, had they also said, Elise, you love to sew, you love to quilt, and all these things, did you realize that quilting is all geometry? And he's right. You have to figure out the area of your quilt. You have to figure out how much material you need. How big are your squares going to be? How big are the components within that square? How do you have to measure and account for the seam allowances to make sure that when you finish putting all the pieces together, your square is the right side, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Had they done that, I would have been all over it. I probably would have gotten an A in the class. And I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce myself to you. I apologize. My name is Elise Belanger-Bailey, and I am the Inclusionary Practices Coordinator for ESD 113, which is in Tumwater next to Olympia. And there are 9 of us in the state because there are 9 ESDs. Each ESD has their own Inclusionary Practices Coordinator, and I'll be giving you their names and contact information. However, if you would like to contact me instead of one of them to get started, that's perfectly fine, and that information will be available to you. So who am I? Why am I talking to you about this? Well, I have a PhD in Special Education Administration and Instruction, and all that means is I know how to pilot higher and deeper. And I love taking classes. I love learning in depth. And so heck, I might as well get something, a little piece of paper that says I'm really good at. That's what my PhD is in. I have been a head of school. I've been a head of middle school. I've been a principal. I've been a director of student services, and I've been a teacher. And I have been doing this since 1992. I have 5 grown children, all adults, 4 boys and a daughter, and 2 of my sons had developmental delays and specialized learning needs as they grew up. Fortunately, with good teaching, because I got them with good teachers in the public schools, they are now independent. They do not live with me. They do not need rent money. They pay their taxes and they're not in jail. They are living successful lives. Yes, that's what we do as a parent. I recently got married, so I'm a newlywed, and when you're my age and you get married again, I should say when you're our age and you get married for the second time, you're feeling pretty optimistic. He has 6 children, so together we have 11 grown children, all 23 to almost 40, and many of them are married, they all have jobs, and it's wonderful, and we have grandkids, so whenever you come to our house, it's a real party. And that's me. Sorry that I forgot to do that at the beginning. All right, 3 networks of the brain. Please note the colors. There's a reason for them. The 3 principles of the UDL guidelines are: provide multiple means of engagement, provide multiple means of representation, and provide multiple means of action and expression. You're probably saying, what are those things? How do I know? Where do I find them? We'll get there. Remember, we are going really fast and we're just skimming the surface. We will get a little bit deeper later, and you will be able to use the resources in the agenda to dive even deeper. Engagement, which is always in green, is the affective network, the why of learning. Why should I care? Why should I do this? Why should I pay attention? What's in it for me? Representation is related to the recognition network, the what of learning. What information do I want them to learn? What do I know? What do I want them to know and be able to do? What kind of materials am I going to use to reach all my learners? Those who have visual, hearing, physical, cognitive barriers. It's how I'm going to show them. It's the what and what I'm going to give to them in multiple ways. Action and expression, which is blue, relates to the strategic network or the how of learning. You might even think of this as assessments. How are my students going to demonstrate to me that they know the material? Traditionally, we have done this in one way. Everybody does it the same way. Is that really necessary? Really? So for instance, maybe and if they write an essay, how does that work for the kid who's dyslexic, dysgraphic? How does it work for your ELLs? How does it work for your kids who may have some cognitive or processing delays or things like that? So we can provide different ways. So let's think about like the causes of the Civil War. What led up to the Civil War? Well, yes, some people are going to love writing an essay. That would have been me. I would have written an essay and have illustrations and all that good stuff. Other people may write a poem, write a rap, make a video, put on a skit, all sorts of different ways to express their knowledge of the causes of the Civil War. So it doesn't always need to be one way, and all of them are valid. There is a link to a better quality graphic and information at the bottom of your agenda. These are called the UDL Guidelines, Pillars, and Principles. UDL organizes the learning process into these 3 pillars, guidelines, or principles. You'll hear all 3 used interchangeably. Pillars, guidelines, or principles, all interchangeable. However, the purpose of UDL is to enable students and teachers to become expert learners. Expert learners are purposeful and motivated, resourceful and knowledgeable, and strategic and goal-oriented. Now, you ask me, what does that mean and what does it look like? How do we get there? Remember, please, our purpose for this session is to review a basic understanding of the foundational components or framework or theory of UDL and apply this to the lesson planning process. Remember, I told you, this is the 10,000-foot view. You are going to have so many questions. You might want to jot some of them down and tell me them later, put them in the chat, things like that. So this is just a basic overview. Nobody is going to ask you to implement this when you start back up at school, fully implement this in September. You wouldn't be able to. You would be frustrated. So we're just going to talk about a basic understanding. Universal Design for Learning is a framework to improve and optimize teaching and learning for all people based on scientific insights into how humans learn. These are multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, and multiple means of action and expression. This is what we mean. My very, 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 very favorite book about UDL lesson planning is by Patricia Ralabate. Her quote is the one I use to succinctly encapsulate what UDL is. UDL is a proactive instructional design process. Let me say that again. UDL is a proactive instructional design process. It can also be very useful to design for your PLCs. It's a wonderful, useful way to make decisions about the whole school, about your classroom, about parents, about all sorts of things. Matter of fact, I have become so UDLized in my brain that I told you we just moved into this house and we've had to put together a lot of things. And I realize how very unfriendly a lot of information is, or directions and things like that. They assume a lot of knowledge. Doesn't work. So why UDL? Like removing barriers in buildings, UDL removes barriers to academic success for all students. UDL is based on neuroscience, aligned with the three networks of the brain involving learning. Engagement, we said that's the why of learning. Why should I care? Representation, what am I learning? What is the meat? What is the content? And action expression, how will I or my student demonstrate their learning to me? Customizing and adjusting to scaffold and support learning. There is no such thing as an average or typical learner. That is a myth, an absolute myth, and it makes me angry. This is where standardized tests fail us. This is where traditional lesson planning and curriculum have failed us. There is no such thing as the average or typical learning. The other thing about using UDL as your framework to support your lessons is that it infuses flexibility, and you as a teacher do not need to retrofit lessons. So for instance, let's say you have a lesson and you have designed it for the average student. You're using an average textbook. And what happens if you have one child that has dyslexia, and they also have ELL, and they have multiple needs? What if you have a kid who just comes from a different culture? What about a child who's highly capable and in third grade is reading at a 6th, 7th, or 8th grade level? That was me. How are you going to design a lesson for them? Are you going to design individual lessons for those children? Are you going to separate them for their learning? That's not what we call inclusive practices. That makes a lot of work. You have to, in essence, design 4 or 5 lessons. we're going to design one lesson that meets the needs of the students on the edges, and so that all the students will be able to benefit. I don't know about you, I would rather design one lesson than 5, 6, or 10. As we said, the goal of UDL is for our students and ourselves to become expert learners. UDL defines expert learners as learners who are resourceful and knowledgeable, strategic and goal-oriented, and purposeful and motivated. Simply and powerfully put, David Rose explains that UDL is all about guiding each student to be the absolute best learner that they can be. Ralabate divides her UDL lesson planning process into 7 steps, none of which may be skipped. They are to define clear goals, consider learner variability, appropriate assessment, choosing materials, choosing methods, selecting materials and media, teaching, and refining through reflection. We'll explore each of these in a few minutes, but I'd like you to note the first 5 are where all the magic happens, right here. All the preparing, all the framework that you need, all the design. This is in the first 5 steps. The teaching is what sparkles and comes alive. And then we refine what we've done through reflection. We ask ourselves some very important guiding questions. What is it critical for my students to know and do? Have I made that clear? That's engagement. What is critical for my students to know or do? Have I made that clear? What options can I provide so that all students can meet the objective? That is representation and variability. That is where we deliver the content. How are they going to access the content? How will I give each student personalized, mastery-oriented feedback to help them persist? This is action and expression or assessment. How can I provide options for consistent self-reflection? And this should be a part of teaching from kindergarten on up. We need to teach our students how to reflect on their learning, their actions, and their choices so that they can improve for next time and start to do it themselves automatically. So step 1, defining the learning goal. What will students be able to know or do at the end of the lesson? We start with a standard that is clear and specific, or a goal, a standard or goal. Are the means flexible? The way you're getting there, is it flexible? Is scaffolding needed? Because as you know, we can't teach unless they know what we're talking about. It's like golf. You're telling me the object of the game. What else do I need to know before I pick up that club? Where will the goal be posted? And how will the students revisit the goal throughout the lesson? I cannot emphasize this enough. I have served as a principal, a leader, and a teacher only in very high-need districts. The my typical districts had 80% or more free and reduced lunch rate, 80% or more ELL. The district I did for the highest was 92% on all those, and they were ELL students. Most of them and their parents were not well educated either. And so what does it have to do with goal? Because if I have the goal posted, students can revisit it to keep themselves on track and remind them of what they should be doing and where they should be concentrating and what they should be focusing upon. Step 2, anticipate the variables. What are the nature of your students' strengths or barriers? This is the engagement part. Is it physical, developmental, cultural, language, processing? What are their strengths and or barriers? And it is important to note their strengths as well as their barriers. What background knowledge do they need or do they already bring to class? ELL, vocabulary, physically, culturally, or what do they lack? Vocab, cultural background knowledge, things like that. What would any barriers to students demonstrating their understanding, what would they be? Is the only way of answering our Civil War question writing an essay? Is the only way to evaluate mathematics with a worksheet? Really? I don't think so. And we're going to explore some of those other ways. By the way, for this section, I have included in your agenda tools and resources for meeting each of these needs with a variety of students. There are websites, there are books, there are all kinds of things to help you meet the variety of needs you will find in your classroom. Another important resource is the special education teacher and your para. They have a lot of knowledge about how delays and barriers work, and they also have a lot of resources. Please use them, excuse me, but do not count on them to do all your teaching. Excuse me, just a moment. Thank you. As we go along, we need to be clear about our assessments. And here are some questions to ask. Is your assessment accessible? Does it address mobility, communication, sensory, physical, cognitive variability? Is your assessment flexible? How much scaffolding do you need? What kind of different delivery methods could your students use? And this is one, and this is a word that sometimes causes people to, bridle, but is your assessment free of bias? Cultural experiences, language, gender, disability, socioeconomic. Is your assessment valid? Represent the true content to measure. So for instance, if what you're measuring is their understanding of the causes of the Civil War, do they really, are they also graded on how many paragraphs, spelling, neatness, grammar, punctuation, all that stuff? Really? Or are they being assessed on the content of their knowledge? Are they being judged on what they really know, not how they package it? And it should be designed to measure a specific knowledge. I read that too. Is your assessment reliable? Is it clear and consistent as possible? Does it have well-defined directions? Consistency in how to evaluate, and do not penalize learners with challenges such as dyslexia, dysgraphia, ESL, or etc. Do your assessments not penalize learners with challenges? One of the ways of scoring rubrics or grading our students is by rubrics. Traditionally, we scored and we found the average and so forth and so on. Thinking about this, I would highly encourage you to explore the excuse me, The Myth of Average by Todd Rose. Please see your agenda for links to his book and to his video. His TED video is 18 minutes long and will revolutionize your thinking about variability in the classroom. Many scoring techniques are based on the traditional statistical average used in standardized testing. However, the concept of learner variability indicates that there is no such thing as an average learner. Let me say that again. There is no such thing as an average learner. I was an above average student. I was what you would now call a high cap student. Back in the 60s in California, they called them mentally gifted minders. My mother was so proud. She kept my certificate till the day she died. But I was great at reading. Anything that involves the humanities, language, memory, math, science, not so much. I was average. Maybe in a few areas I was below average. I remember in first and second grade being put in the bluebird group for math. And we all know that those were the kids who were kind of slow in math. Well, eventually my cognition developed, and then I was able to do fine in math. But remember, people have different abilities at different times in their lives. There's no such thing as average. A rubric describes what student work must contain to get a certain score, based on a standard and offer criteria or descriptions that are observable, not subjective, observable. Rubrics can divide the assignment into components aligned with standards and provide explanations of the components at increasing levels of mastery. Resources to help build UDL-based rubrics are in your agenda. What is the difference between the messages, "You got this wrong," a paper covered in red ink, which was mine for spelling, I'm still a terrible speller, "You got this wrong," "You're almost there," "Not yet," or "You made it," "You did it," "You made every single criteria," "Well done." Imagine the difference in those statements, especially those in the middle, "You're almost there," and "Not yet." Personally, I always recommend the students be given the chance to do an assignment again because hopefully you've taught them to reflect, you've worked with them to reflect, and we give them a chance to improve. Remember, now that I know better, I do better. There you go. Section 4, step 4, methods. Traditional methods are that the teacher lectures to a homogeneous group. Well, that may have been true when I was in school and we wrote with papyrus and berry juice, but that's not true anymore. Learners who struggle with lectures or who need more assistance bear the burden to adapt in order to achieve the lesson goal when traditional methods are used. Let me say that again. The learner bears the burden of adapting. If a student doesn't know how to adapt, if they don't understand, how are they going to do it? And they get further and further behind. They become disengaged, and this is when you see your bored students. UDL strategies emphasize interactivity, heterogeneous grouping, rich scaffolds, and supports for understanding and independent learning. Selecting your materials and media. Thoughts about choosing materials for your lesson planning. And remember I said in your agenda is a list of tools and resources for each of the 3 pillars or guidelines. Choose materials and media based on how well they help all learners to achieve the learning goal. All learners. Choose materials and media that offer flexibility, relevance, and the appropriate level of assistance. Media can also imply digital technology. Low-tech media or low-tech options include drawing tools, sorting games, puzzles, display boards, charts, graphic organizers, concept and story makers, or charts. These are the materials you are going to use to convey the information they need to learn. And after you've done all that, it's time to start teaching. And just like your students, some teachers are eager beavers and some are cautious. Please, I beg you, start slowly with baby steps, one guideline at a time. For instance, as you can tell, I'm very shy and quiet, right? I love multiple means of assessment. I can think of several ways that a student can demonstrate their knowledge. This comes easily to me. So if I were incorporating UDL and starting to incorporate it in my teaching, I would choose one assignment and one lesson and one method of assessment and provide multiple means. I might have kids write it, make a diorama, write a rap, Write a poem, draw a picture, put on a play, make a skit, come in costume, and tell a story. Those are ways that I can think of and I'm very comfortable with. Always start with what you're comfortable. Start with one of them at a time and one lesson at a time. You should start with a rubric for the components that must be present to demonstrate an understanding, maybe an example or something different. Say you feel most comfortable with using a variety of assessment methods, diorama, video, rap, writing, etc., or let them come up with their own based on the rubric. Once you have taught these skills to your students, you can ask them, how do you think you can demonstrate your learning to me, but make all of these criteria? And have them assess. Give them voice, give them choice, give them control, and they will blossom. Try it for one lesson, reflect, and try it again, maybe on a different lesson, or maybe on the same lesson if it needs to be retaught. Here is a UDL barrier flowchart developed by Zach Smith along with Katie Novak. As we have been talking about barriers to learning, we have discussed that at times it is easier to identify the specific barriers for students, and therefore it is easier to plan intentionally to remove or eliminate them, whereas other times it takes some work to figure out the exact barrier facing the student in order to plan for it. So, in order to identify specific barriers to learning, in order to help your students be more successful, I want to present you with this tool. The barrier identification flowchart starts by asking 3 questions. Do students care, or are they motivated to learn? Do students understand the concept? And is the student able to show their understanding in the teacher-specified way, meeting those rubrics? Then you as the teacher or the leader would answer the questions, and it will help you determine where you need to go back and do more work. If you answer no to one of the questions, this tool will prompt you to go back and follow up with providing additional information. There is also a video with the author, Zach Smith, explaining how it works. Both of those links are in your agenda. UDL is all about identifying barriers in the learning environment and removing them. Instead of expecting the student to adjust to the environment, UDL is a tool that allows teachers and leaders to focus on our design and delivery as adults so that the students can be more successful learners. The final step is to reflect on your lesson. What happened? Describe what happened. Why did it happen? Analysis and interpretation. So what? What's the meaning and application of your discovery? Now what? The implication for action. If they did it really well, will I do it again? Oh, you bet. If they didn't do it so well, how can I help them? Reflect on students' work and voice. Review the data. How did they score? What did you, the teacher, see in the student work that was surprising or unexpected? How much independence is displayed by the work? To what extent did the students rely on scaffolds or models? That's not a bad thing. It's an important data point to know. Reflecting with partners. Working with others requires trust. Others may see things you don't see or understand situations in different ways. We always encourage teachers who are new to this to buddy up and work with a co-teacher or a mentor teacher. Professional learning communities use ULD strategies to design and assess the meeting. And these should always include norms and to scaffold research. Now I'd like to take a moment for you to share out in the chat. I have shared with you at least two full PD sessions worth of information so far. It is really fast and very shallow. Please take a moment to reflect on your own practice. You are probably noticing that you already do many of things these things, they are simply good teaching. The fact that you're here right now and that you're curious about this indicates that you are passionate about teaching to the edges and reaching all students. So I'd like to take a moment. Please go ahead and respond to one, all, some of these questions, or a noticing or a wondering in the chat right now. We'll take about 2 or 3 minutes. And please feel free to respond to others. Thank you, Kelly. Being a newlywed, yay, it's fun. Rebecca, what are some of the strategies you are already doing or have already used successfully? It would be great if you could share with others because you are an expert. What barriers do you anticipate using this information? You don't know enough, you don't know how to implement it. How will you overcome the barriers? You can overcome them by talking with an experienced teacher, talking with your IPP coordinator in your ESD, mentoring, finding a mentor, things like that. Okay. Remember what I told you? Please respond in the chat. It's how I know I'm not talking just to my camera or an empty void. Void, not boy. I don't use rubrics for everything, but I do use them for larger projects to help students understand the scope of the project and the grading criteria. Excellent, Becca. And I hope that you have gotten positive feedback. One of the best things I love about rubrics is that parents don't argue. It really cuts down on student and parent arguing about a grade. That's my favorite thing. Okay, we'll go on. Now, this is where you get that piece of paper or pencil. Engagement, understanding the why, the what of learning actions. We already differentiate. Good in our lessons. Excellent to know this isn't that different from the what. Yes, you're right. It's not different. It's not very different from what you're already doing. It's just slightly adjusting the framework, increasing vocabulary, and systematizing how you go about incorporating and planning for variety in your classroom. So if you have that paper and pencil, I'd like you right now to write down in your mind a grade or class that you've taught, grade level or class. Write down an area of study. So if you're a middle school on up, you probably may teach just science or just math, whereas in the lower levels, you teach all of them. So just think of one. Just think of one in a lesson that you've taught recently that went well for you. Consider a content standard or topic within that area of study for that grade level. You don't have to know it. You don't have to look it up. Just consider it. Write it down. And list any of the types of barriers your students may encounter. I would also like you to consider 6 factors in learner variability: needs, skills, talents, interests, background, and culture. These can all be applied or incorporated into Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I love the saying, you have to Maslow before you can bloom. Discuss each area within yourself, with your colleagues, and tie in culturally responsive teaching. How can culturally responsive techniques and strategies improve all of these areas, especially in STEAM? You want our students to say, I can do this. I'm not a loser. I can try again. I'm not there yet. That's PBIS, that's CRT, that is many SDI, it's MTSS. There are many, many ways to reach that and resources you could use. UDL shows us that barriers to learning can be reduced through thoughtful design. Thoughtful design. UDL acknowledges that the barrier is in the environment, not the learner. Let me say that again. UDL acknowledges that the barrier is in the environment, not the learner. When these barriers are removed, all students can succeed. And my question would be, who is responsible for the environment? Now what I'd like you to do is go to your agenda and open the UDL, the CAST, C-A-S-T, UDL lesson guide, the PDF, in a separate tab. I'd like you to be able to see the whole of it. This is not the only lesson planning template I have provided for you. As with UDL, we want a variety. This one is the one I happen to like best, and I have had the most success with teachers getting started to plan. Go through them, find one that works well for you, that matches the way you think and plan. In the following slides, I have separated out each section from the CAST design to discuss in greater detail. Please keep your class, area of study, content standard, and barriers you noted a few minutes ago in mind. Goals. Notice that goals are always first. Use a state standard or one from your curriculum materials. Use verbs to state your objectives as often as possible. Be concise and precise. When you've written those down, and you don't have to do it now, this is later, we're going too fast. You can check if you've considered just about everything. Is your goal clear and specific? Are the means flexible? If not, how will you scaffold? Where will the goal be posted? And how will students revisit the goal? Evidence. How will you know that the students have achieved their goal? What will success look like? Have you offered multiple means for students to demonstrate success? Does assessment directly measure realization of the goal? Does it measure what you wanted them to learn, not all the extra stuff? And do you have options for both formative and summative assessments? So one of the questions I'm often asked is, what do we do with standardized tests? So I let kids do dioramas. I let them draw. I let them write poetry. That doesn't work on standardized tests. And you're absolutely right. I have an absolute antipathy for standardized tests, and I feel that they should be eliminated yesterday. However, that's probably not going to happen unless you people elect me queen. So what I would recommend is, once they have demonstrated they understand the concept, take some time to discreetly show, teach, and practice how they demonstrate that knowledge on a standardized test, either filling out the bubbles, writing the sentences, things like that, reading the directions. So show them how to apply what they already know, what they've already demonstrated in a standardized format. Because what you're doing is you're just teaching them a different format. You've already taught the context. You're teaching them how to put their knowledge in a particular format. Barriers. And what barriers to your goals can you anticipate? And a check. Are there barriers in the context, in location, grouping, and noise level? One of the things we've noticed in distance learning is that many students have actually done better. And this is for a variety of reasons. less distractions. They can learn at their own pace. They can go back and review materials. They can find extra materials. So they can concentrate. So the context of delivering the lesson matters. How you present the content, the presentation. Is it oral? Is it written? Are those your only alternatives? Can you have videos? Can you show grids? Can you show charts? Can you show comparative pictures? Or activities? Writing, speaking, planning? What kind of barriers would you anticipate to do these activities and to learn the content? Variability in engagement. Remember, engagement is the why of learning. It's the affective region of the brain. Why should we care about this? And what barriers might children bring with them? So, do the options address the anticipated barriers? Are there options for choice, relevancy, minimizing distractions? Are there options for balancing perceived demands and resources? And are there options for master-oriented feedback, collaboration, self-reflection? So some of the barriers that they bring with them that might prevent them from engaging is they can't hear, they can't see, they can't read, they can't process fast enough, they don't have cultural background, they don't have cultural knowledge, they come with lower vocabularies, things like that. The information or what you're teaching may not be part of what they regularly talk about, demonstrate, or see in their home. Variability in representation. Do these options address the anticipated barriers? Are there options for video, audio display of info, not just written or lecture? Are there options to build background knowledge and highlight key patterns? Variability in action and expression. Do the options you're thinking of address the anticipated barriers? Kid who has dyslexia, they're hard of hearing, visually impaired, language lack, cultural differences. Does it anticipate those barriers? Have you given multiple means? Are there options for physical action? As we know, students, especially the younger they are, do very well when they have some physical action. Studies have shown that adults pay attention for 90 minutes. And after 90 minutes, their attention levels, their cognitive levels take a plummet. This is why I chose to present this material in 90 minutes instead of 2, 3, or 4 hours. Are there options for multiple communication tools? Are there options for varying levels of support? Are there options for goal setting, strategy development, and self-monitoring? As I said before, in your agenda is a whole list of strategies, resources, and things like that to support variability in all 3 of these areas. After the lesson, and this is very, very important. I know how busy you are. I remember what it was like in the classroom. At the end of the day or the week, reflection is very, very important. It's one of the cornerstones of universal design for learning. How did it go? What barriers did you encounter? Maybe that were unexpected. What will you do differently next time? And importantly, what will you keep the same? What worked? If it worked, do it again. Excellent. And for your students, and this is where rubrics come in handy. How will my students reflect on their learning and progress? Now, students can do this from kindergarten all the way up to adults. You can teach strategies of reflection. What does it look like, sound like, feel like? The best way to demonstrate is, of course, that you do it aloud. After a lesson, if you have time or whatever, ask your students, how did that go? What was easy for you to understand? What wasn't? Is there something I should do differently next time? What did I leave out? Ask your students. This always gets them engaged. It makes them feel empowered. It makes them feel competent. It makes them and lets them know that you care. It deepens your relationship with your class. And learning starts with relationships. If you don't have a relationship with a student, I don't care how brilliant you are, you will not reach them. So at this point, I'd like you to share out again, please. And we have just a couple minutes. No, what time did we start? I finished at 3, 1, 2:30. I forgot what time we're finishing. 2:30? Oh, I ended 3. Oh my gosh, we've gone so fast. Okay, great. So please share in the chat what you are already doing. Which of these things are you already doing? What surprised you? What confused you? What do you think you might like to try? And what needs a deeper dive? What would you like to know more about? And how may I help you? This is your time for putting wonderings in the chat, questions, confusions, asking for resources. How did I cut a half hour? Did I skip something? I can't tell if I skipped something. Cool. I'll stay in the room for a little bit longer until 3 o'clock, but as we're wrapping up, I would also like you to put in the chat, I used to think blank, and now I think blank about UDL, about teaching, about anything having to do with our subject. I used to think blank, and now I think blank. You can put in 2 words, you can write the whole sentence, you can respond in a variety of ways. I used to think blank, and now I think blank. And finally, I am part of the Inclusionary Practices Project funded by the legislature. There's one of us in each of the ESDs. All of our time, resources, and PDs are paid for, and they are free to your school or to your district. The resources we have are available through Canvas. All 12 modules for understanding deeply what UDL is and how it's applied for culturally responsive teaching. How do I engage community and family? How UDL and the ELLs, things like that. We have so many topics and deep dives for you to meet your needs. Remember, we just did a very fast overview. If you want to know more, great. Thank you, Kelly. You put learning goal on the board. Excellent. Teaching. I already offering. I read books aloud. Yes. They can reread aloud to each other or to stuffed animals. Excellent. And I show the video of book read aloud by the author or someone on SchoolTube. And I have audio versions with headphones. You have met so many, you have eliminated, Debbie, so many variables. I'm very impressed. That was great. If you're interested in learning more about the project or finding your coordinator, at the very, in your agenda is the link to the AESD project, and you can find your person right here. Or you are very welcome to contact me, and I will help you and get you started. I used to think rubrics were not that important, but now I know how important it is for the students to know what is expected and how they will be assessed. Exactly. Would you, here's a question. Would you as a teacher take a job and not understand the evaluation process? Most of you have been in Washington. There are 1 or 2 evaluation systems that we use, but would you take any job without knowing how you're going to be assessed, what your goals are, whether you're failing, giving any, oh, Kelly, yes, exactly. No, I wouldn't. Absolutely not. You would not. It's the same for your students. They should know how they're going to be assessed, what are the criteria, and where they are on the spectrum of meeting those requirements. I've put my contact information up for you. Please feel free to contact me at any time. I will remain in the room until 3 o'clock. Feel free to ask questions, wonderings. If you want to argue with me about something, that's fine too. Just let me know. Otherwise, thank you so very much for your attention and your time. I know this is the 4th day and the last one, and you're probably tired. Enjoy the weather, have a great weekend, and be safe.